We're off. Terry Caliendo from Dedicated Managers again. Here for the umpteenth time today, losing my voice, but wanted to talk about one more update that I had to do. The JavaScript Debounce function. Pretty famous function apparently. If you search for JavaScript, even if you spell it wrong apparently, JavaScript Debouncer, you're going to get all kinds of stuff. And here's the NPM I think that I ended up using to install it. But here's the David Walsh, apparently a very prominent programmer in the community. He supposedly originally came up with this. I think I've seen a couple places that different people came up with it. But it's a very simple debounce function, and it's actually really highlights how awesome JavaScript is, that I can send it a function and then do some operations to kind of mask that function and pass that function along, so that when I call this debounce thing, I then end up calling the function that I passed to it with its original parameters and whatnot. I'm not going to take the time to really go into how this works, but the succinctness of this is just amazing, and it's what JavaScript has really come to allow you to do, and the flexibility of JavaScript that shows you how you can just do some amazing things with very short, small amount of code. Anyway, so I needed to debounce the input. So when I have a change here, if we go to my console, previously with every letter you would type, I'll just type one letter here, I would mutate my entity, which means I would save it locally, and then I would fcommit, which means I'm calling out to Firebase to post my data to Firebase. And the way I'm currently doing, I'm sending all the data over. So it's not efficient for me to send this entire form of data for every key press. So what the debouncer does is, for as long as I type, as long as I don't take more than a half a second break, which is what I configured it to be, it will not fire this commit entity. So it's just going to mutate the entity for every keystroke, and then at the end, after half a second has passed, then it will commit the entity. So I'll show that now by I'll type for a couple seconds, and so that's all. That is me typing, and then at the end it did the commit. So I'm giving a lot of output lately right now, quite a bit of output there, but you'll see that the fcommit is only called once. So I'll do it this way with a filter, and I'll actually go back and delete. So every keystroke is creating an entity update, but then at the end there is that fcommit just at the end. So if I look for mutate, this is every single one of these mutates is a keystroke when I was deleting. But if I look for fcommit, there's only one. So it waited until I was done typing, or at least left enough of a pause so that it would shoot through only one copy. And this actually turned out to be a big deal when the cloud functions were firing over to Algolia. The cloud functions are asynchronous, and so with every key press that I was sending over a commit, and they were actually finishing out of order. So I would type, if I typed SCOOTER, it would send over, all this stuff would get put into Firebase just fine. It would show up just fine in here. But when Firestore fired it off, it was going through out of order. And what I was getting in Algolia, if I look at my indices and I search for Scooter, I was actually just getting something like SCOO, and the TER wasn't there. And Algolia was getting each fire, but what was happening is because they were asynchronous, they were finishing out of order, so they were updating out of our order. So the Scooter, the final Scooter was getting sent to Algolia before the SCOO was getting sent, or SCO was being sent. So Algolia would get that last update that was out of order, and so it was out of sync. So I needed to do something to, give Firebase, the cloud function, more time to send information over to Algolia and give a bigger, programmatic break. A half second is a long time in the programming world, in the data world. That it's significantly limited that issue. In fact, I haven't seen that issue since. So now, I'm doing it here. So it's not Algolia doesn't update real time in this interface. You have to reload to get the change. But the change is there. Well, it's not Scooter anymore. It's SCO. So that's what I have. So what did I have to do to get that to work? Let's take a look. Originally, if I look at the this is my Git Kraken. These are all my commits, and this is where I added the debouncer. Originally, I just copied that function that I found and threw it in my store because, again, I didn't know if it was going to work. So I just copied that entire function that we were talking about. I was talking about earlier. This one has comments and how it works. I copied that right into my project, and then had to add a few things. But here I call it. So here you can see that this is my update current entity, which gets called every time a keystroke happens, and a data piece gets updated for every keystroke, for every type. And so that's why we're seeing that mutate current entity for everyone. And before, I was dispatching a commit to save it to the store. So this fcommit entity calls a Firestore function that goes and saves my my form there back to the database as a document on a collection. But this is where I implemented the debouncer. So this context.dispatch got moved into my debouncer functionality, and so I had to do a few things to prepare it. So this right here is just a lot of work to set up a entity debouncers object that holds my debouncer. So I need one debouncer for each entity. Really, I could have one debouncer for the entire project, because really it only lasts half a second. And my thought process was, and it turned out to be wrong, I still have to fix this, where if I am, the idea is, or my thought process was that, if I'm typing in this field and then I tab to this field and keep typing, if it's the same listener, then it's not going to update correctly. It's going to write over the old one. Well, actually, this should work, because I do these updates, these mutations, which save to the local Vuex storage, and then when I save it to Firebase, I send that whole form. So I should be able to type here and come down here. Oops, my screen's all locked up. But if I keep typing, that's only going to send one commit. So now the question is, did that show up over in Algolia? So if I go over to Algolia and I refresh, and I look for that client ADSF, yeah, it did come through. So I guess what I'm trying to protect against is, which is probably not possible, somebody typing and then really fast switching to a different client and typing some more, where that first form, if it happened within a half a second, that first form didn't get a chance to write before the second one created the new debouncer. So anyway, that's a lot of unnecessary discussion probably. The idea is that I needed a listener. So it's just a placeholder, some type of variable that's going to hold this function, this debounce function, for when I call it. So anyway, I store it in a Vuex variable that happens to be the collection ID and the doc ID. So that's how it's referenced. And so if I look in my, where's the project? If I go to my view, Vuex, we should see, here's my debouncers for primary kinship caregiver, and now if I change to a different one, I actually end up, I delete my debouncers, so I clear out my debouncers. So there's really, I'm doing a lot of overkill as far as tracking it, but it's stored that, it's that debounce function is stored in this variable as a callback, so that when I call it, when I call it here, this is a function that I have this dispatch to commit the entity in, and so I'm telling, hey, take this function, put it in this debouncer thing here, and for each time I call a keystroke, each time this update current entity gets called, only call that fcommit entity one time. And in fact, actually what's happening here is I'm setting it up. So if this whole thing says that if the debouncer function it does not exist, so if it's not a function, whatever's stored in this long thing, and that's another thing I have to talk about, is the quick way in JavaScript to see if a property exists on a string of embedded objects that might not exist. Anyway, so this thing says if the function, if the debouncer entity, if the debouncer function is there, go ahead. If it's not there, sorry, I'm really talking a lot tonight, losing my voice here and my train of thought. If the debouncer does not exist, create that function, and so that creates that function with this this dispatch. So now it's embedded in the debouncer function. So now whether or not I just created it or if it already existed, each time it comes through on each keystroke, it's going to do that commit entity. But the second time the keystroke happens, this function is already going to be created, and so now it's going to skip that because of this if statement, and it's going to come down here and it's just going to call that function. That's what this parentheses does. It's going to call that function with my entity property container, which contains the information about the update on the form. So that's this object that gets passed in, which contains the changes that happened where the person was typing into the form fields. So basically, a lot of work just to say that instead of calling this, I set up this function and store it so that I can call it for each key press and call that function with the latest information. And so it'll store all the most recent functions, but delete the older ones for each keystroke, so that only the very last one is called. And if you read the documentation, when you set this up, you can pass, I think it's right here. Here, when I pass false, I'm saying create the function or call the function on the trailing edge of 500 milliseconds, which is half a second. So call this function max it out, only let it happen every 500 milliseconds after the person stops typing. If this was true, this would get called first, and then it couldn't happen again for another half second. But I want to save the most recent change, which is the trailing edge. So just look this function up. You'll be able to find it and see the trailing edge type stuff and what that's all about. So anyway, it's just a quick function I had to call to stop that misinformation or that out of order information that was happening here on the functions where they were finishing out of order and causing my database to be out of sync. So again, Terry Caliendo, Dedicated Managers, 14 minutes for a 5-minute video. Pretty amazing. You get what you pay for. Have a good night. Any questions or comments, please write it in the comments or questions section, and feel free to comment me at dedicatedmanagers.com. Take care and have a great day.